Listen closely, because this is a story about a girl who is invisible. Not because she was made of air or magic, but because the people who should have loved her chose not to see her at all. Her name was Grace. She lived in a small, dusty village called Akpoma, where the roads were red clay and the houses leaned like tired old men. Grace was 16 years old, but if you asked her what it felt like to be 16, she wouldn't know how to answer. Because Grace had never celebrated a birthday, never blown out candles, never heard anyone sing to her or tell her she mattered. Grace was the only girl in a family of 6 children. 5 boys, 1 girl. And in that house, being a girl wasn't a gift. It was a curse. Can you imagine waking up every single day before the sun rises? Not because you want to, but because if you don't, you'll be beaten? That was Grace's life. While her 5 brothers slept peacefully in their beds with pillows and blankets, Grace slept on a torn mat in the corner of the room. The mat was thin, damp, and smelled like mildew. The floor was cold and hard beneath her. But that was all she had. Every morning, she would wake in the dark, her bones aching, her stomach empty. She would boil water for her brothers' baths. She would cook their breakfast, yam, eggs, tea. She would pack their school bags, making sure their uniforms were clean and ironed. And then she would stand by the door and watch them leave for school, laughing, talking, dreaming about their futures. And Grace? Grace would turn around and face a mountain of chores. Sweeping, washing, scrubbing floors until her knees bled, fetching water from the well until her shoulders screamed, cooking lunch, cooking dinner. And if the food wasn't ready on time, or if it wasn't hot enough, or if one of her brothers didn't like the taste, she would be slapped, yelled at, called useless. Her meals were always last. Always leftovers. Cold rice. Dried up soup. Sometimes just the bones from the chicken her brothers had eaten. She ate like a dog, quickly, quietly, afraid someone would take even that away from her. One day, when Grace was 11 years old, she made a mistake. She asked her mother a question. "Mama," she said softly, her voice shaking, "can I go to school? Just for a little while? I want to learn how to read." Her mother stopped stirring the pot. She turned slowly. And then, without warning, she slapped Grace so hard that the girl's ears rang for hours. "Who will cook for your brothers if you're in school?" her mother snapped, her eyes cold and sharp. "You want them to starve? Girls don't need school. You'll get married one day. That's your only job." Grace never asked again. She learned to bury her dreams deep, deep down where no one could see them. She learned that hoping was dangerous, that wanting something for herself was selfish, that her only purpose in life was to serve. But even in all that darkness, there was a tiny flicker of light inside her. A small voice that whispered, "Maybe one day Mama will hug me. Maybe Papa will say he's proud. Maybe my brothers will see me and smile." She was wrong. Because one terrible day, everything changed. It started with Emmanuel, Grace's eldest brother. He was 17, strong, loud, and always treated Grace like she was invisible. One afternoon, he came home from school holding his head and groaning. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. "Mama, my head," he whispered. "It hurts so much." Grace's mother panicked immediately. She rushed to him, held him, stroked his face. My precious son, what's wrong?" By that evening, Emmanuel was vomiting. By the next morning, he couldn't stand. Grace's father lifted him like he was carrying a king and rushed him to the hospital, shouting for neighbors to help. Grace stayed behind. She scrubbed the floors. She cooked the meals. And she waited, her stomach twisting with fear. Not just fear for Emmanuel, but fear for what would come next. When her parents returned, they looked like ghosts. Her father's hands trembled. Her mother's eyes were red and swollen. The room was silent except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Then her father spoke, his voice flat and dead. "He has a tumor. In his brain. He needs surgery." Grace's mother gasped. "How much?" 15 million naira. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. 15 million. That was more money than their family had ever seen. More money than they could dream of. It might as well have been 15 billion. The days that followed were chaos. Grace watched as her parents sold everything. Their old car, the television, the generator that barely worked. Her mother took off her precious coral beads, the ones passed down from her grandmother, and sold them to a jeweler, crying the entire time. But it still wasn't enough. They begged relatives. Everyone said no. They went to the church. People prayed, but no one gave money. Emmanuel got worse. His eyes turned gray. He stopped eating. He looked like he was fading away. And then, one night, Grace's mother came into the room where Grace lay on her mat. She stood over her for a long, long time. Her shadow stretched across the floor like a dark warning. Then she spoke, her voice cold as ice. "Grace, there's one last way to get the money." Grace sat up slowly, her heart pounding. "What way, Mama?" Her mother knelt down and whispered, "There's a rich man in the city. A very rich man. He's offering a fortune to any family willing to give their daughter in marriage to his dog." For a moment, Grace couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. The words didn't make sense. "A dog," she whispered. "Yes," her mother said, her face emotionless. "It's strange, I know. But the money he's offering, it's enough. It's enough to save Emmanuel." Grace felt tears streaming down her face. "Mama, you can't mean that. I'm a person. I'm your daughter." Her mother stood up, brushing off her wrapper like Grace's words were dust. "Don't be foolish, Grace. This isn't about feelings. This is about survival. Your brother is dying. Do you want him to die while you sit here breathing and doing nothing?" "But Mama, we've already decided," her mother said coldly. "Your father and I have accepted the offer. The man is sending a car tomorrow morning." Grace couldn't speak. She couldn't move. She just sat there, shaking, as her mother walked out and locked the door behind her. That night, Grace cried until she had no tears left. She begged God to wake her up from this nightmare. But when morning came, nothing had changed. Her mother threw her few belongings into a small bag, torn skirts, faded wrappers, one old dress. She didn't say a word. She didn't look Grace in the eyes. At 9 o'clock, a shiny black car pulled up to their house. A man in an expensive suit stepped out. He looked rich. Too rich to be standing in their dusty compound. Grace's father rushed out, smiling like a fool. Her mother grabbed Grace's arm and dragged her forward. The man looked at Grace the way someone looks at a cow in the market. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask if she was okay. He just said to her father, "This is the girl?" "Yes, sir," her father said, still smiling. "That's our Grace." The man pulled out a thick envelope and handed it to her father. Grace watched as her father opened it, counted the money, and smiled even wider. "She's all yours now," her father said. The man nodded. "Follow me, girl." Grace turned one last time to look at her mother. She wanted to see something. Anything. A tear. A hesitation. A sign that her mother loved her. But her mother turned her face away. Grace climbed into the car. The door closed. The engine started. And as they drove away, she looked back through the rear window at the only home she'd ever known. No one waved. No one cried. No one followed. They had sold her. For 15 million naira. Like she was nothing. The drive felt endless. Grace sat in the back seat, clutching her small bag, staring out the window as the world changed around her. The dusty roads became smooth highways. The small houses became tall buildings. And then, finally, they turned onto a private road lined with trees and flowers. At the end of that road stood the biggest house Grace had ever seen. No, not a house. A mansion. White marble walls. Glittering windows. A fountain in the center of the courtyard. Water dancing in the sunlight like it had never known dust or dirt. The car stopped. The man opened the door. "Come down." Grace stepped out, her legs shaking. She followed him through massive front doors and into a world that felt like a dream. The floors were polished marble. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen stars. The air smelled like roses and something else, something old and powerful. They walked down a long hallway. Grace's bare feet sank into the soft carpet. Finally, they reached a pair of tall double doors. The man opened them. And there he was. The dog. He sat on a raised platform covered in velvet. His fur was pure white, shining like silk in the sunlight. Around his neck was a collar studded with diamonds. But it was his eyes that froze Grace in place. Blue. Deep, endless blue. Eyes that looked too human. Too sad. Too aware. The man beside her bowed slightly. "Master," he said, "your bride has arrived." Grace's knees buckled. The dog stood, and he was massive. His head came up to her chest. He moved slowly, gracefully, circling her like he was studying her soul. Then he stopped in front of her. And nodded. The man in the suit smiled faintly. "He accepts you." Before Grace could speak, 2 women in uniforms entered and led her away. They took her to a bedroom so beautiful it hurt to look at. A bed larger than her family's entire kitchen. Velvet curtains. A golden mirror. A chandelier that glowed like captured sunlight. But when the door closed behind her, Grace heard the lock click. She was trapped. She ran to the door and tried the handle. It wouldn't move. She ran to the window. Bars on the outside. She sank to the floor, her body shaking with sobs. What kind of place was this? What kind of life had she been sold into? And somewhere in the mansion, the white dog with the blue eyes sat alone, staring at the moon. Waiting. What will happen to Grace in this strange mansion? Who is the mysterious dog with human eyes? And what dark secret does this place hold? Grace didn't sleep that first night. How could she? She sat on the edge of that enormous bed, hugging her knees, staring at the locked door. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow made her heart race. She was trapped in a golden cage, married to a creature she didn't understand, in a world that felt like a dream and a nightmare all at once. When morning finally came, soft and golden through the curtains, there was a gentle knock at the door. A young woman entered. She was maybe 20 years old, dressed in a simple black and white uniform. Her face was kind, but her eyes looked tired, like they had seen too much. "Good morning," she said softly. "My name is Sarah. I'm here to help you understand this place." Grace stood up slowly, her body stiff from sitting all night. "Where am I? What is this place?" Sarah placed a tray of food on the table. Fresh bread, fruit, eggs. The smell made Grace's stomach growl, but she couldn't eat. "Not yet. There are 3 rules in this house," Sarah said, her voice calm but serious. "You must follow them. Always." "What rules?" Grace whispered. Sarah counted on her fingers. 1. Never leave your room without permission. 2. Never try to run away. 3. Never disobey the master. Grace felt her chest tighten. "The master? You mean the dog?" Sarah nodded slowly. "But why?" Grace asked, her voice breaking. "Why am I here? What does he want from me?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she stepped closer and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "He's not just a dog, Grace. He's cursed." The word hung in the air like smoke. "Cursed," Grace repeated. "Long ago he was a man, a prince, but he did something terrible, and a powerful woman cursed him. Now he's trapped in that form. The only way to break the curse is—" Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. "True love. Someone must love him truly, deeply, without fear or condition. Only then will he become human again." Grace felt dizzy. This was madness. How could anyone love a beast? How could she? "Why me?" she asked, tears filling her eyes. "I'm nobody. I'm just a girl my parents didn't want." Sarah's expression softened. "That's exactly why. He's been waiting for someone whose heart is pure. Someone who knows what it means to be rejected, abandoned, unseen. Someone like you." Before Grace could respond, Sarah turned and left, locking the door behind her. Grace stood there, trembling, trying to make sense of it all. A curse. A prince. True love. It sounded like a fairy tale. But fairy tales didn't feel like this. They didn't feel so heavy, so real, so terrifying. The next morning, Sarah came again. This time, she brought a beautiful dress. Blue silk with tiny pearls stitched along the sleeves. It was the most beautiful thing Grace had ever seen. "The master wishes to walk with you," Sarah said. "In the garden." Grace's hands shook as she put on the dress. It fit perfectly, like it had been made just for her. Sarah brushed her hair gently and tied it back with a ribbon. "You'll be okay," Sarah whispered. "Just be yourself." Grace wasn't sure who herself even was anymore. But she followed Sarah down the long hallway, through corridors lined with paintings and mirrors, and finally outside. The garden took her breath away. Roses everywhere. Red, white, gold, pink. They bloomed like they had never known drought or death. The air was thick with their perfume. A fountain bubbled softly in the distance. Birds sang in the trees. And in the center of it all, sitting quietly among the flowers, was him. The white dog. The beast. The prince. When he saw Grace, he stood. And then, for the first time, she heard his voice. Not with her ears. Inside her mind. "You're afraid of me." Grace gasped and stumbled backward. You can talk?" "Only to the one chosen to break the curse." His voice was deep, calm, and filled with a sadness so heavy it made her chest ache. She stared at him, her heart pounding. "What are you?" He lowered his head, like he was ashamed. "I was once a man. A prince. My name was Adeyemi. Prince Adeyemi of Onitsha." The name echoed in Grace's mind like thunder. "I was proud," he continued. "Cold. I cared only about power and wealth. One day, an old woman came to my palace gates, begging for shelter. She was dirty, ragged, weak. And I laughed at her. I mocked her. I called her ugly and worthless and sent her away. Grace felt a chill run down her spine. But she wasn't just a beggar, Adeyemi said quietly. She was a sorceress. And that night, she returned in her true form and cursed me. She said I would remain a beast until someone who had suffered more than I had could look at me and not run. Someone pure. Someone kind. Someone who could love me despite what I had become. Grace's throat tightened. How long have you been like this? 10 years, he said. 10 long, lonely years. They brought girls here before you. Many girls. But they all screamed. They all ran. Some fainted. One tried to kill me. None ever stayed. Grace looked into his blue eyes, those impossibly human eyes, and saw something she recognized. Pain. Loneliness. The same feelings she had carried her whole life. I'm sorry, she whispered. That must have been so hard. He tilted his head, surprised. You're not afraid? I am, Grace admitted. But I also understand what it's like to be seen as a monster. My family looked at me every day and saw nothing. At least you were cursed by magic. I was cursed by being born a girl. Something shifted in his eyes. Something soft. Something like hope. From that day forward, everything changed. Every morning, Grace and Adeyemi walked together in the garden. At first, she kept her distance. But slowly, day by day, she stepped closer. She stopped flinching when he moved. She started asking him questions. And he answered, always honest, always gentle. He told her about his mother, who had loved roses and died too young. He told her about the kingdom he had lost. He told her about the loneliness that felt like drowning. And Grace? She told him about the cold floor she slept on. The slaps. The hunger. The way her mother looked through her like she was glass. And do you know what he said? You didn't deserve that. You deserve to be loved. You still do. No one had ever said that to her before. One night, under a full moon, Grace did something that surprised even herself. She found Adeyemi sitting alone beneath the old sycamore tree, staring at the stars. She walked up to him, her heart pounding, and held out her hand. Dance with me, she said softly. He looked at her like she had spoken a spell. Dance. Grace, I don't look like someone you dance with. She shook her head. I didn't ask what you look like. I asked you to dance. Slowly, hesitantly, he placed his paw in her hand. It was rough, heavy, but warm. There was no music, just the rustling of leaves, the whisper of wind, the beat of two broken hearts learning to be whole. And then something magical happened. Tiny lights rose from the ground like fireflies. The roses around them opened wider, glowing softly. And somewhere, from nowhere and everywhere, music began to play. Soft, sweet, impossible. They danced in that garden, under the stars, and for the first time in both their lives, they didn't feel alone. When the music faded, Adeyemi looked at her with wonder in his eyes. Thank you, he whispered. For seeing me. Grace smiled, tears streaming down her face. Thank you for seeing me too. But the curse wasn't done with them yet. One night, a terrible storm came. Thunder shook the mansion. Lightning split the sky. The wind howled like wolves. Grace couldn't sleep. The storm felt alive. Angry. Wrong. Then Sarah burst into her room, her face pale with fear. Come with me, she said urgently. Now. She led Grace down a dark corridor to a steel door carved with strange symbols. Inside, Grace found Adeyemi, but he wasn't the gentle creature she had come to know. He was massive, twice his normal size. His fur crackled with silver lightning. His eyes glowed gold. He was shaking, growling, fighting something inside himself. What's happening? Grace cried. The storm is feeding the curse, Sarah said. He's losing control. If he fully transforms, he'll be trapped forever. Grace didn't think. She ran to him. Adeyemi, she shouted over the thunder. His glowing eyes locked onto hers. There was panic in them. Fear. He didn't want to hurt her, but the beast inside was rising. Grace knelt beside him and placed her hand on his trembling body. He was hot, electric, alive with wild magic. You're not alone, she said firmly. I'm here. I'm not running. I'm not leaving. He let out a tortured howl that shook the walls. I see you, Grace said louder now. Not the beast. Not the curse. You. And I choose to stay. The wind screamed. The candles flickered. And then silence. The growling stopped. The shaking slowed. Adeyemi collapsed beside her, breathing hard but calm. The storm outside faded to nothing. Grace stayed with him until dawn, her hand resting on his side, anchoring him to the world. When he finally opened his eyes, they were blue again. Soft. Human. You saved me, he whispered. No, Grace said. You just needed someone to believe in you. But there was one more trial. One final test. Days later, Adeyemi led Grace to the great hall. The room was dark, lit only by floating candles. There's something you need to see, he said aloud this time, his voice echoing. My true form. Grace's heart raced. What do you mean? The curse didn't just make me a beast, he said. It revealed what I truly was. A creature caught between worlds. And if you can't accept me as I really am, the curse will never break. Then it began. His body rose into the air. Light wrapped around him like fire. His form shifted, changed, transformed. Wings burst from his back, glowing with golden light. Horns curled from his temples, shimmering like crystal. His hands sparked with power. His entire body glowed with ancient marks that pulsed like a heartbeat. He wasn't a dog. He wasn't a man. He was something else. Something holy and terrifying and beautiful all at once. Do you still see me, Grace? His voice echoed through the hall. Tears streamed down her face. Not from fear. From awe. Yes, she whispered. I see you. All of you. He lowered himself to the ground, his glowing form trembling. Then come. End it. Grace walked forward. Every step was a choice. Every breath was an act of faith. When she reached him, she placed her hands on his glowing face and looked into his eyes. I choose you, she said clearly. In every form. In every shadow. Forever. And in that moment, the curse shattered. The room exploded with light. Wind whipped through the hall. The symbols on the walls blazed like fire. Adeyemi cried out, collapsing to his knees, light pouring from his chest, his eyes, his hands. Grace held him as the magic tore through the air. Hold on, she cried. I'm here. And then stillness. The light faded. The wind died. The candles settled. And in Grace's arms was not a beast, not a creature of legend, but a man. Warm. Real. Human. He opened his eyes slowly. Still blue, but softer now. Clearer. I'm free, he whispered, his voice breaking. Grace. I'm free. She laughed through her tears. We both are. He pulled her close, and for the first time, Grace felt what it was like to be held. Not grabbed. Not controlled. But held. Loved. Chosen. The mansion transformed overnight. Light poured through every window. Staff smiled freely. Locked doors swung open. Grace was no longer a prisoner. She was home. Adeyemi taught her to read. They danced in the garden every evening. They laughed until their stomachs hurt. Grace looked in the mirror and saw someone she had never seen before, herself. Whole. Free. Radiant. But one day, there was a knock at the door. Sarah came running. Grace, she said breathlessly. Your parents are here. Grace's heart dropped. She followed Sarah to the entrance hall, and there they were. Her mother, clutching her old handbag. Her father, wearing a fake smile. They looked smaller somehow. Weaker. Grace, her mother said, her voice suddenly sweet. We sent letters, but you didn't answer. So we came. Grace stood still, her face unreadable. Emmanuel is sick again, her mother continued. The doctors say it's worse. We need more money. Please, Grace. We're family. Her father stepped forward, his eyes scanning the mansion greedily. We heard your husband has treasure. Gold. Jewels. Just show us where they are. Before Grace could speak, Adeyemi entered the room. Fully human. Tall. Strong. Regal. Her mother's mouth fell open. Wait, you married a man? You thought I married a dog, Grace said coldly. You sold me to a dog. And I survived. I grew. I became more than you ever let me be. Her father's expression hardened. He raised his hand like he might strike her. But Adeyemi moved like lightning. One step. No shout. No violence. Just power. If you touch her again, he said, his voice low and dangerous, I will forget mercy. For the first time, Grace's parents looked afraid. Guards appeared at the door. Silent. Strong. They're leaving, Adeyemi said. Now. As her parents were escorted out, her mother turned back one last time. You ungrateful child, she spat. But Grace didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just watched them go. When the doors closed, Adeyemi turned to her. Are you okay? She nodded. I'm better than okay. I'm free. He smiled and pulled her close. Weeks later, Adeyemi led Grace back to the garden where it all began. The roses were in full bloom. The sun was warm. The air smelled like hope. Under the old sycamore tree, he knelt. In his hand was a simple golden ring. "Grace," he said softly, "I don't ask you because of a curse. I don't ask because I need saving. I ask because I love you. Will you marry me? Truly this time." Grace's heart overflowed. She smiled through her tears. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes. And so the girl who was sold like an object, the girl who was told she was worthless, the girl who never heard "I love you" without conditions, became a queen. Not because of magic, but because of love. Real, true, chosen love. She wasn't rescued. She was seen. And in being seen, she found herself. And that, my friends, is the story of Grace and Adeyemi. A reminder that your worth is not determined by those who couldn't see it. A reminder that love, true love, doesn't demand perfection. It sees you, all of you, and chooses you anyway. If this story touched your heart, remember, you too deserve to be chosen. You too deserve to be loved. And you too are worth so much more than anyone ever made you believe. Thank you for listening.